How should we think about the death of Wim Hof's first wife, Olia, in 1995, now that we know that the world-famous guru of ice and breathwork kicked his second wife in her stomach when she was pregnant with Wim's fifth child? This is the question that I was trying to answer last night when I recorded this video, and this morning there's already been a huge update. After De Volkskrant's piece came out this weekend, Genesis Films announced that they have stopped production on the feature film The Iceman, which was about Wim Hof's life. It seems that the Wim Hof empire really is on the verge of collapse. All right, now let's get back to the video that I recorded last night. Over the weekend, the Dutch newspaper de Volkskrant put out a report alleging intense domestic violence in Wim Hof's relationships with his ex-wives and partners, both sexual and physical, and also assaulting one of his stepsons. And this is a bombshell of a report because it shows a side of Wim Hof that he has always tried to keep hidden. And yet I think we're at a point now where if we don't talk about this, we're enabling really, really bad things to come forward. So I'm going to do just two or three things in this report. I'm going to go over the De Volkskrant evidence and talk a little bit about what it means about his actual origin story and some really, really problematic facts that I've been collecting for about 2 years now about his relationship with Olia Hoff, which was his first wife, that indicate, well, some pretty dire things. So, you know, this is sort of extemporaneous. I have a lot of notes that I'm going to refer to, but you just follow with me on this. You know, I have been reporting on a spate of deaths, 34 people who have died doing the Wim Hof method. And I had written this book, What Doesn't Kill Us, that really, really supported Wim and everything that he did over the years. And I find it, I have a duty to tell you what I know and also where the limitations of my knowledge are. So, yeah. And before I get too much deeper, you know, I've known that this story was coming out because I've actually had several conversations with Carolyn, who was the main source in the story, over the years, where she told me about the abuse that Wim had done to her, how he had beaten her, how there was sexual abuse. But at the time, she told me that she wanted to be off the record. She didn't want any of that information to come out. So that has been informing my reporting over the years, even though I haven't actually said it, which might give you a little bit of context for why my reports look like they have over the last few years. I am so grateful to De Volkskrant, in particular Annika Stoffelen, who was the main reporter on the piece, for their excellent reporting, which picked up court records, which has lots of corroborating information and sources. So it's not just a single source piece. They have done really their due diligence. And I highly recommend that you just go read that piece, and there will be links down in the description to it, because that will give you more context than what I'm able to provide right here. Before we go too much further into this, the one thing that I want to just highlight up front is that some people will say, they will see this report and say, well, I don't care about his personal life. I don't care who Wim is as a person, if he's done bad things, because his method works and it makes their lives better. And I will say that I still do the Wim Hof method, the breathwork, and the cold all the time. I'm still a like 11 or 12 year practitioner at this point. But we need to call out his personal behavior because his recklessness gets people hurt. And if he is saying that his methods can cure mental illness and change the way that your body works to become a better and more compassionate person, well, it should give us pause a little bit if his own actions are violent, if his own actions make him more unstable and even dangerous. So let's dig in as you evaluate your own relationship with Wim Hof and his method. After Olia Hoff, Wim Hof's first wife, with whom he had, I think, 4 children, died, Wim Hof went off to back to Amsterdam. He lived in a squat house, and he was really having trouble taking care of his children. He met this woman, Caroline, and they hit it off at first, but soon things turned pretty dark. In this article, Caroline says that Hoff called her a whore for talking to other men, and in an email called her a dirty bitch whore. And they have documentation of that. Now, over the years, their relationship got more and more increasingly violent. And to quote the article again, Hoff confronted her in the living room one evening, roaring with rage after she had once again asked him to find a solution for his children. And context there, his children and him were not living together. They were living in a squat house. He was living with Caroline, and it was a big contested thing in their relationship. He slapped my face, and then he dragged me through the room by my hair and tried to kick me in the belly. I was just about able to hide behind the couch, so his kick only grazed me, and then he left. Now, what's really important about that is that at this moment, she was 3 months pregnant with Wim Hof's 5th child, Noah. So Wim Hof is beating his pregnant wife. They later write that he grabbed me by the throat, cutting off my breath. I came very close to dying, and eventually he let me go, probably because Noah was around. This was actually several years afterwards. So he's choking her and almost kills her. She's getting ready to die, and Wim lets her go and goes away. Now, this was in a report to the Dutch child welfare, but Wim Hof maintains that that's not true. Now, over the years, this violence made its way into the courtrooms. There is extensive documentation, I believe it's in the divorce filings and a child welfare decree, as well as an individual court judgment in the Dutch courts. Now, in one of those court proceedings, the court documents say that the magistrate was not impressed. This gentleman calls himself the Iceman, he said. Meanwhile, he has many personal problems. For example, you've hurt yourself by sitting on a fountain. Now, context here, Wim Hof sat on a fountain in Vondel Park in Amsterdam and almost killed himself by giving himself what is called the near-fatal enema. There's a big story to that, and I've done other videos about it, so I won't get into the details, but it's a bananas story. Having read this case, I cannot help but think that what you do as a sportsman is perhaps an escape from the reality of your personal life. After that assault charge, Hoff was sentenced to 40 hours of community service and to pay a €350 fine, which was a slap on the wrist for domestic violence and almost killing his wife. Why it went that way, I cannot say. But at least they admitted that there was a court judgment. Now, in a second judgment, this happened in 2015 when Caroline was trying to get formal custody of her child, Noah, the Dutch Child Welfare Council concluded that Hoff had committed so much psychological violence against his son, Noah, that the boy never felt safe with him. The court therefore decided that Hoff had forfeited the right to parental access. This is a big deal. Custody of Wim's own child went to Caroline. And in one of those letters, Wim wrote, "I have been a bastard because of my situation with my children, who are driven by other realities and have poisoned my heart." In yet another email, he wrote, "They won't change unless I make a lot of money." Now, this was like roughly 2010. And why that statement is really interesting to me is this was before Wim got really, really famous. That sort of happened around 2013, 2014. And Enema, his oldest son, was more or less disconnected with Wim at that time. But then when they reconnected, Enema did it by his own recollection because of the money.
I don't practice his method, right? 19 years ago, I saw an opportunity with my dad. I didn't spoke to him like for 10 years or something. I made my little website, blah, blah. He broke up with his wife in those times. And I saw an opportunity. I grabbed it, because he was famous as the Iceman. Wim Hof method did not exist. It was like, but he did have a lot of attention towards him. So I always say, I sell air and cold. I'm a great marketing guy,
Yes.
Fuck yeah, it's mine.
It's not Wim's.
It's not Wim's.
Is that abnormal for you to get in?
Yes, I never take ice baths. I never take them. So fuck this. I got a trauma, man, from the ice baths,
And so Wim has this control over his children, this relationship which is based around finances more than love, because Wim was pretty abusive, it seems. Now, I have seen Wim in violent rages on multiple occasions. Now, famously in my book, What Doesn't Kill Us, it ends with Wim, getting really, really angry at me and everyone else on the group. And when we're trying to summit this final set of inclines, and Wim pushes people to a place where everyone, including the guides, think it's dangerous. And he's just so angry at me. And Wim himself, we had a little disagreement about an hour ago, and most of the group stayed behind. They wanted lunch, which you can't really blame them. Even maybe more importantly, things that I have personally noticed with him on my various interactions. I didn't put this in What Doesn't Kill Us. I didn't think it fit at the time, but I think it's relevant to talk about now. When I'd arrived in Holland, I think this was in 2015, he was dating a woman who was in a nearby city whose job was like a beautician. They'd met on a Wim Hof course, and he was absolutely head over heels in love with her, telling me all this great stuff about how great their relationship was. And I was like, that's cool. But 3 or 4 days into the trip there, I was there about a week or maybe a week and a half, he got really, really angry. He just had a phone call with her, and he was like looking at me like crying and yelling and red in the face, upset because she told him that she was pregnant with his child, and she had chosen to have an abortion. And Wim was apoplectically mad at that, and he called her all sorts of terrible names for doing that. And in my opinion, a woman has a right to choose what she does with her body, and maybe she had decided that she just couldn't raise a child with Wim. Maybe she'd experienced some of these violent outbursts himself. And I saw that, and I saw his rage, his what to me was an inexplicable rage, because he really wanted another child. And I don't know, it has never sat with me, and I've seen this sort of like almost hatred sometimes towards women. And this brings me to what I was sort of highlighting at the very beginning of this conversation. Let's talk about Olia Hoff and that death, which happened in 1995, because it's like the founding myth of Wim Hof's origin story, and that story usually goes like this. Wim and Olia had a troubled relationship. It was magical in some ways, and they loved each other, but she had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and eventually it was too much for her, and she jumped out of the window during the running of the bulls in Pamplona. And from that grief of dealing with his wife's suicide, he has doubled down on the method and had become the Iceman. He found strength in the ice because of Olia's death. Now, that's the story that it's very important to note that Wim publicly recounts. There aren't a lot of other sources that were adults at that time who talk about this. This is Wim's statement. Olia was unstable. He could have saved her, but she was being taken advantage of by the pharmaceutical company that was trying to treat her, and it messed with her head. She saw demons, and she couldn't handle them, and eventually she died. That's the general story that gets repeated basically all over the internet. Let's talk about some of the inconsistencies that Wim Hof has communicated to De Volkskrant over the years of coverage. Now, obviously, the Dutch newspaper has been covering Wim at least since 1998, when he first started popping up in local media stories. Now, in 1998, Wim Hof told De Volkskrant that his first wife, Olia, had died in a, quote, run-of-the-mill car crash, which is a very different story. Of course, in 2022, Wim stated in an interview that she had jumped from an apartment building 8 stories down. That was also the story that Wim Hof told me in 2013. So either he was really embarrassed about the reason that she died, or something is inconsistent at the very least. But there are echoes that the Wim Hof that Carolyn has described, right, that Caroline has described of his violent behavior. We see echoes of that in Wim Hof's relationship with Olia. Now, this is what his brother, Wim Hof's brother, older brother, Rob Hoff, remembers from that time when I interviewed him about a year ago.
Then we found Olia at the home crying, and she was in Holland, not speaking the language, and left alone with the children. Wim was outside, didn't leave any money. When he came back, he treated her very badly. My former girlfriend was a psychologist and saw everything. He beat us. He beat her, and when she cried, he locked her up in the wardrobe.
And that is the life that Olia lived with Wim. Now, of course, I wasn't there for the Olia years. I can just sort of look back and try to reinterpret the facts that have been reported in various places. But the fact that his brother, who at that point had even spoken to other people, De Volkskrant talks about how he had talked to his now ex-wife, who he is estranged from, and how she also remembered this talk of violence. It sort of indicates that in 1995, their relationship was really, really troubled. Now, there's another report as well, this one in the Daily Mail in 2022, that also indicates that there was violence in the relationship. Now, I'm going to read you a couple passages from that paper. I asked him about his lowest point, and Wim Hof braces as if he stepped onto the ice. That's very colorful writing. Once, she was behind our son with a knife, Wim admits. My son escaped. He ran away. She was saying that he had to die to live. The voices were telling her to kill her own children. And then Wim nods. She thought that by throwing them from the flat down to the ground, she would save their spirits, their beings, and that she loved them. Now, if that's true, that's some really hardcore insanity stuff. But I think it's really, to me, what is so important is the fact that there's knife play going on. There's a knife being used in their relationship. There's clearly violence amongst the kids. And why didn't Wim get his kids out of that house immediately? If she is a clear and present danger and she wants to throw the children from the windows, right, in the way that she died later, that's really, really problematic. That's really, really bad. In another passage in that article, it says they lurched between apathy and violence. Wim said, "You never know what was coming or when. It would be quite normal for weeks, and then it would come out of the blue. She did hurt herself. She cut herself in the throat." And he makes a violent stabbing motion. She cut her wrists, her arms. I had to hide all the knives. I mean, if she's running after her kid with a knife, that's a really, really bad thing. But remember, this is also Wim's account. We don't have another account of what that relationship was like, except that it was violent. And then there's this part in that article, and it's just really, really scary to me. Now, the Daily Mail asked Wim whether they were still married at the time of her death. And Wim, well, he had said that right before she died, she had asked for a divorce. Here's the article again. Olia was staying with her parents in Spain, and on that fateful night in 1995, when she eventually took her own life, age 35, having kissed her children goodbye only moments before. It's unclear as to whether they were still together at this point. He says they were, although that she had wanted a divorce, but I think it was one of her personalities telling her to say goodbye because she always came back. So Olia dies at the same time frame that she's asking for a divorce, and Wim has a history of violence with women who cause him trouble and cause him consternation. That's really a weird statement because at other points it says that she died at 2 a.m. So the kids are up and she kisses them and then jumps out the window. How do we know that kiss happened? The kids were asleep. How do they remember they were kissed? Over the years, he has given several different alibis for where he was at the time of Olia's death. Now, in general, he says he was far outside of the city doing something like canyoneering. I remember in 2013, what my memory is he told me that he was in Holland at the time. But I don't think I have a recording of that. So maybe my memory is a little screwy, but let's go into with the canyoneering explanation. To quote the Mail again, I went to the morgue with her father, and there she was. But the strange thing was she looked peaceful. I saw peace in her face. All that terror that I'd seen before was gone. And in a way, you realize that the person is better off in this state because she's not in terror anymore. Read that again. She's better off. Olia, dead Olia, is better off in this dead state. Now, maybe that's just very colorful language, but it's super, super creepy, right? It's creepy to say that your wife is better off. Maybe it's really just he's trying to be poetic or something, or reinforce the necessity of her death to do the method, but it's a weird thing. And then there's this, okay, here's something that I really need to get to. It's a detail of her death notice that I found in a local paper. Now you can see it here, it's in Spanish. But there are some pretty key facts that we can point out. Now, Olia died on July 14th, 1995 at 2 in the morning. Now, she was buried the next day at 11:30 a.m. This means that there were only 33 hours before the moment of her death, and the autopsy and investigation, which is normal state procedures, and her actual burial in the ground. That is a lightning fast timeline. In Spain, I have checked this. In Spain, it is mandatory to do an investigation on suicides, a medical examiner report on suicides. They rushed that through. And it also, the strange thing is, it means that Wim, who was camping, in that article it said he was camping with 6 people. He was taking them canyoneering in the wilderness outside of Pamplona. Now, this is in an era before cell phones. Okay, this is 1995. Not everyone has a cell phone. Wim, who was poor at that point, wouldn't have had a cell phone. And yet he was able to arrive at the morgue the very next day. Now, theoretically, that could be possible, right? That's something that could be possible, but it's a very, very quick timeline for him to get that information and get there so quickly. And the newspaper indicates that he was in attendance at that funeral. It feels to me that something is just a little weird there, that he has changed the story multiple times over the years. And then I've sort of been building up to this. One of the reasons why I've pursued this line of inquiry with you, why would you bring up the strangeness of Wim Hof's first wife's death? Well, I wouldn't have done it if I hadn't gotten some other leads over the years. So, context, I put out this video called The Rise and Fall of the Wim Hof Empire, where I was talking about a bunch of people who had died doing the Wim Hof method. I was talking about some sketchy business practices, some issues with the Wim Hof method. And I got a lot of, honestly, I got a lot of hate on the internet. If you look at the comment sections of that article, a lot of people are very, very angry with me for pointing out, the facts of people dying. But there were also people who were like, yeah, I've seen weird stuff with him too. And one of those people who approached me was a guy named John Viera, who was one of Wim's managers in about 2010, right before enema sort of took control. Wim had this group of other people who had set up events for him when he was trying to become, the Iceman. Okay, I'm just going to read a part of that exchange that I had with John Viera. He says, I'll share some more details later, but for now, Wim was under the regime of Henny Boogert for a long time. Henny Boogert was a photographer who shot some very famous photos of Wim. He's a photographer who had control over Wim. Anyway, Henny accused Wim for financial gain. I don't know what that sentence means, but this next sentence is key. Wim's wife died in Spain after falling out of a window. Wim was a climbing instructor there and was eventually imprisoned for 8 weeks as a suspect for pushing his wife out of the window. That's what he wrote to me. And when I got that message, and this was about 2 years ago, I read his note and I really tried to corroborate Villabrera's account. I have been in touch with the police in Spain. I've been talking to family members in Pamplona. But it's really difficult as an American reporter to get any information out of the Spanish government, let alone a death that happened almost 30 years ago. So I've never been able to corroborate the fact that there might have been a murder investigation against Wim Hof for the death of his wife, Olia. But let's step back for a moment and examine the facts of how his relationship with Caroline had been. He had been arrested for beating her on multiple occasions. Meanwhile, Rob Hoff, Wim's brother, talked about her locking Olia in a closet and beating her as well. It seemed there's newspaper reports about violence in the relationship, and then there's maybe at least one person who knew Wim back in the day says that there was a murder investigation. The allegation there is, did Wim push Olia out of the window? And there's no way I can know that for sure. But what I can say is that when you have a violent man in a relationship with a mentally unstable woman, and they are still together, and then this toxic round and round relationship, Wim Hof was probably, pushed her into more mentally unstable states, and maybe being with Wim Hof, made her more likely to jump out of a window, if not something more criminal and disturbing could have been happening. And, there are documented court judgments. You need to read that De Volkskrant article to know who this Wim Hof is. Now, let's just step back really big one more time and ask, why is any of this important? Wim Hof is a health guru. He says he can help you solve your mental illness with his breathwork and cold protocols. But his stories change all the time. And when he tries to communicate the science, he gets things wrong all the time. He has made up Guinness Book of World Record feats. He claims records that he has never had. He lies about the science. He has a rightward drift. He has violent takes towards women. Is this the man you want to be getting health advice from? Now, I'm not saying that the cold and breath work aren't beneficial. I still practice these things. But I don't practice them because of Wim Hof. I respect that he brought them to my attention. But you can do those things without Wim. You can practice breathwork and resilience without Wim instead of putting this man on a pedestal. He has serious flaws and liabilities, and I regret my role in making Wim Hof so famous. Now, in my book, and I'm actually working on a revision of What Doesn't Kill Us right now. It's been in the works for a while. It should be out in a few months. And I read it over, and I didn't give him a free pass. I pointed out his madness on many, many occasions. But as you get more and more famous, more and more people tell you how great you are. They've told Wim how great he is. They've put him on a pedestal. And it's bad. It's bad. People are looking to him for spiritual advice as a role model for how to act as a person. And when they hear stories about these negative things that have happened about Wim, like if they hear stories about the 34 people who have drowned while doing the Wim Hof method in water, they say, it doesn't matter because I love Wim. It doesn't matter that people are dying. It doesn't matter that he beat multiple women that he was with. He beat a pregnant woman. He kicked a pregnant woman in the stomach. That doesn't matter because I had a great ice bath. Reevaluate your relationship with the Wim Hof method if you are a practitioner. If you're not a practitioner, hey, I still stand by ice baths. I think they're great. I think breath work is great. I'll probably be doing some more reporting on this in the future, but I really, personally, I'm fatigued, and I would like to be done with Wim in my life. Like, I think when the book comes out, maybe I'll never do another video about him because I'm done. So done. I've expended so much emotional effort on Wim over the years. I've gotten so much hate on the internet. Just read the comments of my videos. Probably this video. Read the comments on this video. And if this video somehow has some positive comments, go check out The Rise and Fall of the Wim Hof Method. Just scroll through the comments. You see how much hate there is for telling you the truth. From Pokey Bear LLC in Denver, Colorado, this was Scott Carney Investigates.